Hello, class. I'm Audrey Torres, and I'm presenting Sexual Orientation, Gender Identity, and International Human Rights, written by Cynthia Burack and Keating. About the authors. Cynthia Burack is a professor of women's gender and sexuality studies at Ohio State University. This author's latest work is titled How Trump and the Christian Right Saved LGBTI Human Rights, a Religious Freedom Mystery. Burack's research focuses on identity groups, ideologies, and cultures. Areas of expertise include, but are not limited to, feminist political theory, political psychology, sexuality studies, and religion studies. Before working at OSU, this expert taught at George Washington University and the University of Florida in both political science and women's studies. Their current research focuses on U.S. government advocacy for SOGI and the Christian conservative movement's opposition to SOGI human rights. More information on this author is available at the Ohio State University website under the Department of Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies. Christine Cricket Keating is an associate professor in the Gender, Women, and Sexuality Studies Department at the University of Washington. In her work, she explores ways in which people have both struggled to build more inclusive, egalitarian, and participatory models of political collectivity, as well as analyzing ways in which people have rethought democracy in moments of post-colonial and decolonial transition. This includes alternate models of political collectivity, limits of these models, and pushback against these limits. Her current work theorizes practices of participatory engagement and focuses on contemporary sexual politics in transnational perspectives. Keating is currently working on a collaborative book titled Education for Coalition: Popular Education and Contemporary Political Practice, which draws upon years of a collaborative work in communities of color in the U.S. Areas of expertise include critical pedagogy, decolonized politics, and queer politics, as well as transnational feminisms. More information on this author is available at the University of Washington's website under Department of Gender, Women, and Sexuality Studies. Main argument. This chapter highlights the importance of terminology. The acronym LGBTI for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and intersex refers to people who are likely to be targeted for their sexuality or gender identity. The acronym SOGI references sexual orientation and gender identity human rights. This chapter points out two advantages of the use of the term SOGI. First is that this terminology focuses attention on sexual and gender diversity in general, along with the threats and forms of stigma that have often attached to minority sexual and gender identities. Secondly, this term avoids reinforcing particular categories of sexual and gender identity or names that people in global communities may not embrace. This chapter also outlines the struggle for human rights of LGBTI community. First, it defines central human rights issues for LGBTI people. Human rights advocates are working to address both explicit and implicit SOGI rights violations. These violations are committed by states, civil society, and interpersonally. Jeopardy for SOGI rights means concerns for all other human rights because of the link that exists as a result of sexism. Next, we explore organization through a human rights framework for SOGI. The aim here includes ending political persecution on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity, implementing measures of protection, and fostering recognition of institutional progress such as same-sex marriage and non-normative gender identities. Claiming human rights reinforces the reality that what LGBTI people are seeking is not special rights, but fundamental freedoms of which they have often been deprived. Next, challenges and successes by LGBTI human rights advocates. These successes have been increasing over the last 2 or 3 decades. However, some powerful state actors, such as the US, have played a complicated or contradictory role in SOGI human rights struggles. Finally, the critiques of human rights approaches to SOGI justice struggles include that mainstreaming can often be used to push Eurocentric ideologies. This obscures a realistic LGBTI existence and produces homonormativity. Also, struggles for sexual and gender identity diversity must be linked to other diversity struggles instead of just promoting incorporation of LGBTI culture in dominant heteronormative ways. Strengths and weaknesses. For the strengths of this chapter, it includes exploration on the issue of human rights and LGBTI community. It does a good job of applying this lens to domestic, international, and specific communities, such as faith-based organizations. Also, the inclusion of critiques for this framework allows essential critical inquiry needed to correct practice and further development. For weaknesses, this chapter was pretty self-aware, but I still found areas that could be added on to. Homonormativity and diversity link is addressed. However, the dangers of hate within this community must also be highlighted further. The author calls attention to internalized homophobia that non-normative groups face with regards to self-esteem and comfort in society. However, this self-hate doesn't just lead to suicide, it also leads to further harm to the community that they are struggling to not be identified with. An example of this is religious conversion programs that use people claiming to have left the homosexual lifestyle. These people give testimonies of the possibility of sexual orientation and identity change, claiming homosexuality as part of their personal trauma instead of their identity. This gives a false understanding of sexuality and promotes self-rejectionist behavior, including depression, anxiety, addiction, and suicide. Furthermore, this gives justification for violence against LGBTI groups. Questions. Question number 1. What are some ways heteronormative societal norms have impacted your personal complex human experience? Question number 2. Are there any shadows of homophobic ideology in institutions or communities you have been or are currently a part of? Question number 3. What political agenda does the perpetuation of homophobia serve? Question number 4. How can we link this insight into SOG politics to our previous lessons from this class, such as human trafficking, migration, foreign policy, etc.? Thank you so much for your attention. If you have any questions or comments, I would love to hear them.